Sevco security enables better vulnerability prioritization for security teams. At the core of the Sevco platform is the asset graph. Effectively, it's a way to map the relationships between different asset types. For this example of prioritization, we're going to show the relationship between devices, vulnerabilities, and users. In this example, we have 3 devices, 2 Windows OS machines, and 1 Windows server. You can see the associated asset criticalities and the vulnerabilities that have been pulled in from those machines via a vulnerability assessment tool. There are 2 unique CVEs, CVE1 and CVE3. And if I was going to ask a vulnerability analyst to go and prioritize this, it's fairly straightforward. You'd probably patch CVE1 off cycle. You might monitor CVE3. It's becoming more common for vulnerability management teams to run more than one vulnerability assessment tool. In this case, we have a second. After bringing in the vulnerability data from VA Tool 2, we now have CVE 2, 4, and 5 that need to be prioritized against the initial results from Vulnerability Assessment Tool 1. Let's take a look and see what we should do. After consolidating the results, the vulnerability analyst concludes, let's patch CVE 1 on Windows 1 and 2. Let's patch CVE 2 on Windows 1 on cycle. And then we'll monitor 3 through 5 because the severity is low and the maturity of the exploit is still in proof of concept. And so that takes care of vulnerability prioritization from a pure vulnerability perspective. But when we start to layer on the asset context, it complicates the story even more. Each of these devices should have 3 critical security controls: endpoint agents, patch management agents, and they should be scanned for vulnerability assessment. If we look at Windows OS 2, we can see here that it's missing patch management entirely. And in this scenario, that's quite bad. We have some critical CVEs that need to get patched. Since the patch management agent is missing, those remediation efforts would not take because there's no way to apply the patches that would be pushed by IT. If we look at Windows Server 3, it's actually been missing from vulnerability assessment scanning. And so the situation that we believed that we had of a box with no CVEs, a critical asset with no CVEs, could actually contain a lot of CVEs, and we just don't know about them. And in the situation, what if CVE 1 were sitting on Windows Server 3? It would change our prioritization story. Adding another layer of complexity is who owns the box. When we layer in user data, we can see Windows OS 1 is managed by the Office Manager, but 2 and 3 have interesting users associated with them. The CFO owns Windows OS 2, and you can imagine how an executive having a box missing patch management with a couple critical CVEs would be quite dangerous to the organization, as well as a Windows server with admin credentials on it and not knowing how many CVEs could be there and the relative level of exploitability of those CVEs. And so what Sevco aims to do is provide organizations with better data to drive better decisions. Knowing the full context of the vulnerabilities, the device configuration, and the users associated with them completely changes the prioritization that we would take on all of these devices. Let's see what the final remediation recommendations are for the top 3 issues. They've changed quite a bit. The first suggestion is that we install patch management on Windows OS 2. Without the patch management agent, the remediation efforts to resolve CVE 1 on Windows OS 2 will not take. Then we're going to go and tackle Windows Server 3 and make sure that it's being scanned by the vulnerability assessment tool. We need to understand what's really going on here, and if there truly are no vulnerabilities, or if we have an entirely new vulnerability prioritization effort to go through. And lastly, we're going to revisit Box 2 and patch everything off cycle after that patch management agent is installed because the box belongs to the CFO. And you can see here how the power of the asset graph has unlocked a different type of prioritization, and maybe a type of prioritization that is different from what traditional vulnerability management teams do. When you go beyond the context of just vulnerabilities and start looking at asset and user data, it brings a more holistic approach to the overall prioritization. Better data becomes better decisions and hopefully drives better security posture within the organization.